Penny Kramer reached for the last chocolate glazed donut like her life depended on it, which, considering the week she'd had, wasn't far from the truth. Her fingers brushed the sugary surface just as a deep voice behind her said, "Seriously?" She froze. That voice was rich, smooth, the kind that could probably make a grocery list sound sexy. She turned, donut in hand, to see a man in a tailored navy coat, white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, and eyes the shade of a storm about to hit. He looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, not in line behind her at a corner cafe. "Sorry," Penny said, holding up the donut like it was a fragile artifact. "I didn't know there was a line behind me." "There wasn't," he said, giving her a look that was more amused than annoyed. "I just walked in, but I had my eye on that donut." She glanced at it. "Well, you hesitated." And in the world of pastries, hesitation is defeat. He let out a low laugh, and something about it made her stomach flutter, though that could have just been the lack of breakfast. "Fair enough. Enjoy it." She gave him a small smile and turned away, heart still racing a little. She didn't expect to see him again, but she also didn't expect him to follow her to the cream and sugar station. "You always steal pastries from innocent strangers?" he asked, pouring cream into his coffee beside her. "Only when I'm stressed," she answered, grabbing a napkin. "And I'm way beyond stressed." He leaned slightly against the counter. "Tough morning, more like a tough year." "I get that," he said, sipping his coffee. "I'm Kade Ellington, by the way." That name tickled something in her brain, but she was too distracted by the way he looked at her, like she was more interesting than anything else happening this morning. "Penny Kramer," she replied. "And thanks for not making me feel like a donut thief," he grinned. "You kind of are, but I'll let it go." They left it at that, two strangers sharing a moment over caffeine and sugar. Penny didn't expect anything more. After all, he looked like he lived in penthouses and wrote emails that made people scramble. She, on the other hand, was currently working two part-time jobs, trying to pay off student loans, and had just gotten her hours cut at the marketing firm she'd been praying would make her full-time. So when she walked out of the cafe and into the freezing wind, she chalked it up to a funny little moment that would never come up again. She was wrong. 2 days later, she was called into a meeting at her temp job at Alaris Media, the kind of place with glass walls, espresso machines in the break room, and people who wore blazers for fun. Penny had been helping out in the creative department, mostly making pitch decks and organizing files. But as she stepped into the conference room, the last person she expected to see was Kade Ellington, looking even more polished in a charcoal suit, sitting at the head of the table. Her donut guy, her brain short-circuited. He gave no sign of recognition as their eyes met, but his brows lifted for half a second. Then he looked back at the notes in front of him. "This is Penny Kramer," said her supervisor, Mark. "She's been helping us with the Callisto campaign." "I thought she should be in the room for the strategy discussion." Kade nodded. "Good, let's hear it." Penny forced herself to breathe and took a seat. For the next 40 minutes, she tried not to pass out. Kade didn't look at her once, but she could feel him listening every time she spoke. She offered a few ideas, tried not to fidget, and got through it without embarrassing herself. After the meeting, as everyone filed out, he spoke. "Penny, can you hang back for a second?" Her stomach flipped. Once the door closed, he leaned against the table and crossed his arms. "You didn't mention you worked here. You didn't mention you owned the place," she shot back, pulse racing. He chuckled. "Touché, I wasn't expecting to see you again." Same, a pause. "You did good in there," he said. "You've got instincts." "Thanks, I'm just a temp, though." "Not anymore," he said casually, grabbing his phone off the table. "I'm offering you a full-time position, effective immediately." Her breath caught. "Wait, what?" "I make fast decisions," he said, "and I trust my gut." "You've got something, Penny." She stared at him, heart pounding. "Are you offering me a job because I took your donut?" He tilted his head. "If I say yes, will you take it?" She laughed, still shocked. "Yes. Then yeah." It was the donut. He walked out with a wink and left her standing there, completely stunned. By the end of the week, Penny had a desk, a company email, and a shiny new title: brand strategy associate. People started noticing her. Not because of her clothes or her background, but because her ideas were good. And because Kade Ellington, CEO of Alaris Media, a man worth at least a few $100 million according to a quick Google search, had personally pulled her into his inner circle. He didn't hover. He didn't flirt. Not at first, but he stopped her in the hallway to ask about her thoughts. He invited her into meetings she had no business being in. And sometimes, when they passed each other in the cafe downstairs, he'd slide a chocolate glazed donut across the table without saying a word. And Penny started falling. She didn't want to. It was ridiculous. He was powerful, magnetic, way out of her league. But the way he listened when she spoke, the way he remembered the smallest things she said, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, it was dangerous. One night after a late meeting, he offered her a ride home. She hesitated. "You don't have to, I know," he said, opening the door of a sleek black Maybach. "But I want to." The inside of the car smelled like leather and cedar. It was silent, peaceful, like a different world. She looked at him after a few blocks. "Why are you being so nice to me?" He glanced at her. "Because I like the way you think, and because you stole my donut," she laughed. "You're really not over that, are you?" "Nope," he said with a grin. "And I don't plan on getting over you anytime soon." She stared at him, heart in her throat. He looked back at the road. "Too soon, a little," she whispered. "I can wait," he said softly, "but I won't stay quiet forever," and she believed him. Because nothing about Kade Ellington ever felt halfway. The first time Penny stepped into the executive floor, her heels made too much noise against the marble. She'd been summoned by Kade's assistant for a creative development session, and the idea of being alone with him in his office made her hands clammy. But she wasn't about to let nerves ruin this, not after how hard she'd worked to prove she belonged here. Kade's office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but Penny barely registered the skyline. Her attention went straight to him leaning over a long walnut table, blazer off. Sleeves rolled high on his forearms as he jotted something on a tablet. He looked up when she entered. "You're punctual." "I wasn't sure if this was the kind of meeting where being 2 minutes late gets you quietly fired." He set the tablet down. "You think I'm that kind of boss?" "I think you're unpredictable," Penny said, walking further in. "That's more dangerous." He motioned for her to sit across from him. "I wanted your take on a new campaign. We're courting blacklight vodka. They want edgy but not reckless, authentic but aspirational." "That's a tightrope." Penny listened as he laid out the brand's brief, her mind already turning over visuals, taglines, audience psychology. She leaned forward, energized by the challenge. "What if the hook isn't about the vodka at all?" she said. "What if it's about who you are when you drink it? Not drunk you, but the version that lets go of the curated self, the unfiltered self. That's what people crave, permission to be a little raw." Kade watched her, still as stone. Then he stood, walked to the window, and crossed his arms. "That's not bad, not bad." Penny raised a brow. "I didn't say it was finished," Kade replied, glancing back at her. "But it's the seed of something real. You think in people, not products. That's rare." She flushed but didn't look away. "I think in truth I've had enough fake for a lifetime." He turned fully then, gaze quiet but intense. "That's not just about marketing, is it?" "No," she said, standing slowly. "But I didn't come here to be psychoanalyzed." He didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. "Fair enough." She gathered her folder, ready to leave before she said something she couldn't take back. But just as she reached the door, he spoke again. "I'm throwing a fundraiser this weekend. Art auction. It's a little formal, but if you're free, you want me to attend?" she asked, turning. "I want you to see the other side of this world," he said. "The one we don't talk about in meetings," she hesitated. "Is this a work thing?" "It's a you and me thing," he said simply. "But if you'd rather keep things professional, I'll respect that." Penny stared at him for a beat, then she nodded once. "Fine. But I'm not wearing sequins." He looked her up and down, not inappropriately, more like he was imagining the exact opposite of sequins. I wasn't worried. That Saturday, when a black car pulled up outside her apartment, Penny climbed in wearing a sleek navy jumpsuit with a daring neckline and a vintage coat she'd rescued from a consignment rack. Her hair was up, her nerves downplayed by a practiced calm. The driver brought her to a private gallery in Tribeca, where champagne trays floated like satellites and sculptures, worth more than her college education gleamed under spotlights. She stepped onto the marbled floor and immediately spotted Kade by a large canvas, a brutal swirl of reds and ash-gray shadows. He wore black tie like it had been tailored to his DNA. When he saw her, his posture shifted. It was subtle but real. He came toward her like the rest of the room didn't exist. I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind. That would imply I had one to begin with, she said, accepting a glass from a passing server. He leaned in slightly. You're here. That's enough. For the next hour, they moved through the gallery, murmuring thoughts on the art, the crowd, the quiet absurdity of it all. Penny noticed the way people deferred to Kade, how his presence controlled the room without effort. She also noticed how he kept his attention tethered to her. This one, he said, stopping in front of a piece that looked like chaos restrained by geometry. It's called Vertigo. Appropriate, Penny said. I feel like I'm balancing on a ledge tonight. He looked at her seriously. You're not out of place, Penny. I know I'm not, she said. But I'm not blind either. He stepped closer. I brought you here because I wanted to, not because you needed to prove anything. She turned to face him. Why me? He didn't answer right away, and when he did, his voice dropped low, private. Because you don't flinch. Not when I challenge you, not when you're out of your depth. You don't pretend. That's rare in this world. The air between them shifted. A woman in red interrupted, touching Kade's arm lightly. Excuse me, darling. The investors are asking for you. He nodded, then turned back to Penny. Don't disappear. I'll be by the sculptures, she said, gesturing with her glass. Judging them silently. When he returned 20 minutes later, she was exactly where she'd said she'd be, standing in front of a twisted steel installation that looked like it had been in a car accident. How's the judging going? He asked. This one's winning worst use of metal since gas station wind chimes, Kade chuckled. Come with me. He led her through a side door, up a narrow staircase, and out onto a rooftop terrace. The city unfolded around them like a theater, skyscrapers glowing against the velvet dark. A small table waited, set for two. Soft jazz played faintly from hidden speakers. She looked at him. You planned this. I hoped you'd say yes, he said, pulling out her chair. As they ate grilled sea bass and roasted vegetables with saffron rice, Penny felt the walls she didn't know she'd built begin to shift. You always have a rooftop ready? She teased. Only for things that matter, he said, not missing a beat. She met his eyes. And what exactly is this? I don't know yet, he admitted, but I want to find out. Penny set her fork down, her heart beating faster. You're not what I expected, neither are you, he said. That's why I can't stop thinking about you. She didn't answer. But when he reached across the table and brushed her fingers lightly with his, she didn't pull away. Rain tapped against the windows of the conference room as Penny stood, arms crossed, facing the whiteboard. The creative team sat behind her, jotting notes, but her focus was fixed on the brand campaign. She'd been tasked with leading a test from Kade, though he hadn't said that out loud. He hadn't needed to. She could feel it in the room, in the way his absence was still a presence. Since the rooftop dinner, everything between them had tilted just enough to feel unstable. They still worked side by side, but now there was a current underneath, undeniable and unspoken. When the meeting broke, Penny gathered her laptop and notes, resisting the urge to glance at the glass wall of Kade's office. But before she could step into the hallway, his assistant appeared. He wants to see you. Penny nodded, trying not to read into it. She delivered results. The campaign had been approved by the client, and her team was finally being taken seriously. That's what this was about. Still, when she entered his office and found him standing at the far end, watching the rain blur the city skyline, her pulse quickened. You wanted to see me? She asked, closing the door behind her. He turned, hands in his pockets. That pitch you gave brilliant, they bought every concept, she exhaled, relieved. Then I guess I still have a job. You have more than that, Kade said, walking toward her. You're changing the way this place thinks, I see it, so do the board members. Good, she said carefully, because I've worked too hard to be seen as a novelty. He stopped a few feet away. That's not what you are, I know that now, Penny said. But I didn't always. Kade studied her for a moment. Would you come with me to Paris? What? She blinked. There's a leadership summit, private event, very curated. I was going to bring someone from the executive team, but I realized I'd rather bring someone who actually inspires me. Penny felt the walls inside her shift again. And you think I won't read into that? I hope you will, he said, voice low. Because I'm done pretending this is just professional, she stared at him, stunned. You're serious. Completely, he said. But if you say no, I won't bring it up again. You won't lose your job. Nothing will change unless you want it to. Penny walked past him toward the window, needing a second to breathe. Below, the traffic moved sluggishly, umbrellas bobbing on the sidewalks. I've worked too hard to be someone's office fling, she said, turning to face him. You think that's what this is? Kade asked, stepping closer. I've sat through meetings pretending I wasn't watching you. I've walked away from 100 moments because I didn't want to cross a line you hadn't drawn yet. She stayed quiet. He didn't press. Finally, she said, I'll go to Paris. But not because of you, he nodded once. Understood. She picked up her phone and notebook. I'm going because I earned it. As she walked out of his office, her heart hammered against her ribs. She didn't look back, but she knew he was watching. 3 days later, they landed in Paris. The summit was held at a shadehouse just beyond the city, a place that looked like it had been hand-painted into existence. The kind of place with marble halls, gilded staircases, and private salons where billionaires casually discussed the future of industries. Penny wore a structured black dress, her hair swept into a knot at the base of her neck. She moved through the crowd like she was born to be there, even though her hands were clenched inside her clutch. Kade stayed near, never too close, never too far. He introduced her to CEOs, founders, and diplomats with the same ease he'd once joked about donuts. During the gala dinner, he held her gaze across the candlelit table. She looked away first. Later that night, unable to sleep, Penny stepped out onto the balcony attached to her suite. The night was velvet dark, the air damp with the scent of rain and roses. She was about to go back inside when she heard the soft creak of footsteps. Kade stood a few feet away on the adjoining balcony, holding a glass of wine. He looked at her like he'd known she'd be there. I couldn't sleep, she said. Neither could I, he replied, setting the glass on the railing. They stood in silence, the distance between their balconies just wide enough to keep them separate. I used to think people like you lived in a different world, Penny said, but you don't. You just make it look that way. I built everything I have to prove I could, he said, but lately, it doesn't feel like enough. For what? For someone who sees me, not my title, not the money, just me. She met his eyes and for the first time didn't look away. I see you. He stepped onto the edge of the railing between their balconies and crossed over. Kade, I'm not asking for forever, he said quietly. Not tonight, just a beginning. She hesitated. Then reached out, took his hand and pulled him onto her side. He didn't kiss her, not yet. Instead, he rested his forehead against hers and breathed her in like she was oxygen. And for the first time in a long time, Penny let herself feel weightless. The Paris summit ended with handshakes, champagne toasts, and a dozen offers Kade didn't acknowledge. He and Penny flew back silent for most of the flight, not out of discomfort, but something steadier. She sat beside him, watching clouds dissolve past the window, her fingers curled around the edge of her armrest. Occasionally, their hands brushed. Neither moved away. Work resumed like nothing had changed, but everything had. Their dynamic slipped into something private, unspoken but unmistakable. Glances held a little too long. Meetings ended with a look that said more than any memo. Still, neither crossed the line of the office, not yet. 3 weeks after Paris, Penny was pulled into a strategy session with a new client in crisis. The brand's image had crumbled overnight after a leaked video, and Kade wanted the company's top minds in one room. She arrived early, notes in hand, only to find him already there, pacing. "They're losing traction by the hour," he said without preamble. "We need a full repositioning plan by Monday." "That's less than 72 hours. I know." Penny dropped her bag onto a chair and opened her laptop. "Then we'd better start." They worked late into the night, the glass walls reflecting their tired silhouettes. At some point, Kade called in dinner, roasted duck, truffle risotto, and a bottle of wine that came without a label. When the food arrived, they didn't talk about the campaign. They talked about nothing and everything. "Do you ever regret it?" Penny asked, pushing rice around her plate. "Building all this," he leaned back in his chair. "Sometimes I wonder who I'd be if I hadn't." She watched him in the dim office light, the shadows softening the sharpness in his face. "And who do you think that is?" "Someone quieter, probably bored out of his mind," she laughed. "You don't do well with stillness." He raised his glass. "Guilty." They didn't kiss that night, but when he walked her out of the building, he didn't say goodbye either. He just watched her go, hands in his coat pockets, eyes unreadable. The following Thursday, Penny's apartment building lost heat. She mentioned it during a conference call, offhandedly, as she wrapped a scarf tighter around her neck. That evening, when she got home, a driver was parked outside. "Mr. Ellington asked me to escort you to his residence," the driver said, holding the door open. Penny blinked. "He what?" "He said to tell you the heat works, the wine's open, and the guest suite faces the skyline." She hesitated a long moment, then she got in. Kade's penthouse wasn't just luxurious, it was a world unto itself. Pale stone floors, glass walls that folded away with the press of a button, and a library built into a double-height alcove. She stepped inside like she was trespassing. He met her near the stairs, no tie, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said. "You didn't exactly give me a choice." "I gave you an option," Kade corrected. "There's a difference." Penny crossed her arms. "You know I could have handled a cold apartment." "I know," he said. "But I didn't want you to." That night she stayed in the guest suite. In the morning there was fresh coffee, croissants, and a handwritten note. "No meetings until 10. Make yourself at home." She didn't see him until she walked into the office hours later. He didn't mention it, neither did she. But the distance between them was gone. 2 days later, she stood on the roof of the Alaris building, alone, trying to clear her mind after a difficult pitch that hadn't landed. The sun had dipped low behind the skyline, turning the glass towers gold. She sensed him before she heard him. Kade pushed through the door, hands in his pockets. "It wasn't your fault," he said. "I know," she replied, "but I still hate losing." He stepped beside her. "You don't lose, you learn." She turned. "You always speak in polished sound bites, only when I'm trying to avoid saying something real." "Then say something real." He paused. "I think about you all the time, in meetings, in the car, at night." She didn't flinch. "Then stop thinking. Say what you want." Kade stepped closer, his voice low. "I want you not just in passing, not just when it's easy. I want you in my life, in my space, in my future." Penny's breath hitched. "That's a lot for a rooftop." "I don't care where I say it," he said. "I just need to know if it's too much." She looked at him for a long moment, then she whispered, "It's not." That night he kissed her. It wasn't rushed, it wasn't hesitant, it was a promise. Weeks passed. The office buzzed with new projects. The city thawed into spring, and Penny found herself living in two worlds. One of strategy decks and client calls, the other of quiet mornings on Kade's balcony with coffee and his hand resting lightly on her knee. They didn't flaunt it at work, but nothing about them was hidden. People saw the shift. They whispered, but no one questioned her place anymore. One afternoon, she returned to her desk to find an envelope. Inside was a single card with embossed lettering, "Dinner, 7, dress warm." The card took her not to a restaurant, but to a rooftop garden strung with fairy lights. A string quartet played beneath a canopy of glass. A table weighted with candles flickering. Kade stood at the edge of it all, holding a small box. Penny froze. "I know you don't need grand," he began. "But I do." She didn't move. I need you to know that this isn't about rescuing you or proving anything. This is about the fact that since the moment you stole that donut, you've taken up space in every part of me." He opened the box. "I want you to be my partner in business, in chaos, in everything. Marry me." Penny blinked, stunned. "Say something," he said, voice rough. She stepped forward, took the box from his hand and closed it gently. Then she wrapped her arms around his neck. "You didn't even ask if I liked the ring. I don't care if you like the ring." "Well," she whispered, "I do," Kade exhaled, pulling her closer. "Is that a yes?" She kissed him long and deep before answering. "It's the only yes that's ever mattered." And around them, the city kept moving, unaware that something far more permanent had just begun. The wedding was private, not secret, just sacred. Only 30 guests stood beneath the vaulted glass dome of the botanical conservatory Kade had leased for the day. It was lush with blooming orchids, ivy trailing from crystal chandeliers, and soft golden lanterns that flickered like fireflies. Penny walked down the aisle alone, not because there was no one to escort her, but because she wanted to. She'd gotten here on her own 2 feet, and she intended to meet Kade that way. He wore a midnight blue suit with a silk boutonniere tucked into the lapel, a single white peony chosen by her. His eyes never left hers as she crossed the aisle. There was no music, just silence and the sound of her breath matching his. When they joined hands, it felt like the past had finally stopped chasing her. She didn't cry, neither did he. They didn't need to. Their vows were written in the language of truth. No promises of perfect days or easy nights, just the kind of words that only come when you've seen someone at their most human and love them more for it. "I'll never ask you to be anything but exactly who you are," he said. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that you'll never have to fight alone again." "I don't believe in fairy tales," she replied, voice steady, "but I believe in this, in you, in us. And that's enough to rewrite everything I thought I knew." The moment they were pronounced husband and wife, he kissed her like it was the first time. The kiss wasn't for show, it was for survival, for every storm they'd weathered and everyone they'd faced together. Afterward, they didn't throw a reception. Instead, they disappeared. The private jet lifted off from a secluded airstrip just before dusk. Penny curled against Kade with bare feet tucked beneath her, the hem of her ivory dress trailing over the leather seat. He held a glass of something aged and amber in one hand, but his other never left her. "Where are we going?" she asked, resting her chin on his shoulder. "You'll see." When they landed, it was dark. A vintage convertible waited at the edge of the tarmac, engine already purring. Kade tossed his jacket into the back seat and helped Penny in, her dress spilling over the side like spilled moonlight. They drove through winding hills until they reached a quiet villa tucked into a cliffside. Lanterns lined the stone walkway. Lavender bloomed in wild patches near the steps. Inside, there was no staff. Just a bottle of red wine, a fireplace already lit, and an open terrace overlooking the dark shimmer of the Mediterranean. Penny stepped out onto the terrace, barefoot, arms wrapped around herself. Kade joined her and rested his hands on her shoulders. "I've never felt like I belonged anywhere," she said softly. "Until now." He kissed the curve of her neck. "You belong with me wherever we are." They didn't speak for a while, they didn't need to, days passed like that. Mornings spent tangled in linen sheets, afternoons wandering open-air markets, evenings sipping wine and watching the sun melt into the sea. There were no schedules, no calls, no pressure, just them. One morning, as Penny wandered through the garden barefoot, she found Kade sitting at a stone table beneath a twisted olive tree. He was writing something on thick parchment, a mug of espresso beside him. When he noticed her, he folded the paper and stood. "You weren't supposed to see this yet." "What is it?" she asked, stepping closer. He handed it to her. It was a deed to a small creative studio in Florence already registered in her name. She looked up, stunned. "You said you never wanted to build someone else's dream forever," he said. "So don't." Her throat tightened. "You did this without asking." "I did it because I believe in you, just like you've always believed in me." She looked at the paper, then back at him. You know this means I'm going to drive you crazy trying to run it. I'm counting on it. They didn't return to New York for another 3 weeks. When they did, Penny launched her studio quietly. She didn't announce it. She didn't need to. Clients came through word-of-mouth word that the woman who once redefined brand identity for a major media conglomerate had opened her own doors. Kade didn't step back from his empire. But he did start ending his meetings on time, started cooking more, started showing up to things without a phone in his hand. They didn't try to balance power. They didn't need to. They just respected each other enough to let the scales tip when they needed to. One autumn evening, Penny stood at the window of their penthouse, watching the city flicker below. Kade walked in, loosened his tie, and kissed her shoulder. "You're quiet," he said. "I was just thinking," she whispered. "If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be here, married to you, running my own business, I would have laughed." He slid his arms around her waist. "And what would you say now?" She leaned back into him. "I'd say I finally understand what it means to be seen." They didn't need grand gestures anymore, not because they didn't matter, but because they'd already lived the fairy tale and now they were building something better, their life. Together forever.